Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is Kid Nate of BloodyElbow.com, and I'm here with your bathrobe review and after-action report of UFC on FX7, Belfort versus Bisping. Of course, in the main event, Vitor Belfort murked Michael Bisping and showed once again Michael Bisping can ascend to a certain level in the UFC, and he cannot get past it. Vitor Belfort had nothing to lose in this fight. He was strictly a spoiler, and he did his job. Michael Bisping had everything to lose. He would promise a title shot. He did not do his job. He got knocked out by Vitor Belfort, and that's that. That's the end of Michael Bisping's current title run. Maybe he'll have another renaissance. I don't know. Maybe Vitor Belfort can earn a second title shot against Anderson Silva. I don't know, but let's run through the card first. It was a long card, and it was frankly not a very good card. It was the UFC's debut in Sao Paulo, and the characteristically rowdy Brazilian fans were frequently silenced by the lulls in action, incompetent reffing, and poor performances from the fighters. A few bright spots in the night, enough to redeem it, but overall, I'd say it's one of the weaker UFCs in a while. I'd have to give it probably 2.5 out of 5 stars. Let's run through the card from the beginning. We'll start with the Facebook fight between Francisco Trinaldo and CJ Keith, lightweight battle. One of the better fights on the card. Nothing wrong with it at all. Trinaldo pretty thoroughly outclassed Keith. Keith showed a couple of flashes of competence on the feet, but otherwise was just getting dominated and thrown around and submitted. Got submitted from half guard by an arm triangle choke, which is pretty unusual and shows some skill on Trinaldo's part, but perhaps shows a lack of skill on CJ Keith's part. For a guy who's weakened started by accidentally showing his dick at the weigh-ins, for it to get worse than that, had to be a bad fight, and it did. I don't know if Keith will be back in the UFC. Trinaldo, somebody I expect to see on future Brazilian cards, and maybe even work his way up to a U.S. card and real contention in the division. We'll have to see. Jury's still out. But then from there, the card moved to Fuel TV for a 3-hour marathon, and boy, was it an endurance contest for the fans. The first fight, Ildemar Alcantara against Wagner Prado. Prado basically rolled himself into a knee bar in the second round and got tapped out by Alcantara. Alcantara dominated him every way, shape, and form. It's hard to believe Wagner Prado is in the UFC at all, frankly. His previous fights against Phil Davis were not impressive, and definitely the Alcantara performance was not an impressive one. I want to look back at his record here and see. Yeah, he's just got the loss against Phil Davis, and no contest against Phil Davis, and the loss to Ildemar Alcantara, bringing his record to 8-2. A classic example of somebody who's undefeated in the regional circuit and clearly not quite at UFC caliber. Up next, Alcantara's brother Yuri Alcantara, a bantamweight, fought Pedro Nobre, who was a late substitute, in one of the most fucked up bullshit fights I've ever seen. I gotta say, hats off to Nobre for an award-winning acting performance. Dana White didn't like it, though. Here's the deal. Pedro Nobre came in as a late substitute, kind of undersized, definitely underskilled. Yuri Alcantara was just having his way with the guy, repeatedly taking him down, taking his back. But Nobre snowed the ref, Dan Miragliotta, into... he was complaining of punches to the back of the head, phantom punches. Alcantara, from the video evidence, was not punching him on the back of the head. Maybe one elbow, maybe. But anyway, Miragliotta heard that, kind of freaked out. The next, had a stand-up. Alcantara once again takes Nobre down and starts punching him, clearly punching him on the ear, going out of his way to avoid punching him on the back of the head. And Nobre complained again. Miragliotta stopped the fight and declared it a no contest. And then Nobre laid on the ground as if he had been hit in the medulla oblongata with a sledgehammer. It was complete bullshit. Dana White was furious. The win bonus went to Yuri Alcantara. That says it all. I think it was very clear Yuri Alcantara was the better fighter. I don't expect to see Pedro Nobre back in the UFC. That was a bullshit performance. Not something they want to see in the octagon. Definitely not octagon caliber fighting or sportsmanlike comportment. That brings us to a lightweight fight between Edson Barbosa and Lucas Martins. Barbosa, of course, had been undefeated and cruising into title contention when he ran into Jamie Varner last year and just got his ass whipped. This was his big shot at redemption. I think he took advantage of it. Lucas Martins came in as a pretty hyped UFC newcomer and tapped to punches in the first round. Not impressive. He looked like he was reasonably quick, not quite as quick as Barbosa though. Had some decent striking, but definitely some holes in his technique that Barbosa was able to capitalize on, and Barbosa just beat him down. I think we'll see Lucas Martins back. I think he's a talented kid. I think he's somebody I want to see back, but Barbosa I think we see back on the trail to title contention. It'll be an open matter when he faces stiffer competition if he's stepped up his game enough to avoid getting dismantled again like he did by Jamie Varder, but looks pretty promising. And then we had featherweights. Nick Lentz, I call him Nick the Fence Lentz. His official nickname is the Carney, but I call him the Fence because he likes to get guys up against the fence and clinch with them for lengthy periods of time. Against Diego the Decision Nunez, this is a guy who's had 11 fights in Zuffa and gone to 11 decisions. Talented cat, but just doesn't put it together, doesn't have a good ring IQ, and is willing to coast on leads and different things like that. And anyway, Lentz was just stylistic poison for Nunez. Nunez had no answer for him, couldn't stay on his feet. Lentz put him on his back early, kept him on his back often, punched and elbowed. Lentz stayed active. You couldn't say he didn't, but it was just not entertaining action, mostly because Nunez offered nothing from his guard. He wasn't threatening to get back on the feet. He wasn't threatening submissions. He wasn't landing strikes from the bottom. Just a one-sided decision, but not an entertaining one. One judge even gave Lentz a couple of 10-8 rounds, or one 10-8 round for a 30-26 final score. The other judges both had it at 30-27. Very dominant from Nick Lentz, but not entertaining. Diego Nunez is somebody they were referring to as a fixture of the UFC featherweight division and a long-time contender. And I think he's long in the tooth, and I think he's done as a factor in the featherweight division. And we'll see if he can turn it around. He's not a fighter I'm high on. Up next, we had middleweights Ronnie Marks versus Andrew Craig. Basically, same outcome as the previous fight, a tedious wall install exhibition. And compared to the lay and pray of Nick Lentz, shit, Wallenstall makes lay and pray look good. I have to say that Marks versus Craig, it was an ugly fight. Andrew Craig probably got a little bit more offense in than Diego Nunez, but it was in no way, shape, or form entertaining, and fans were groaning. If I wasn't being paid to watch it, I would have turned the TV off right there. I'd had enough octagon action at that point after the 30 straight minutes of tedious, grinding, positional grappling with very little action. The final fight on the Fuel TV card between Godofredo Castro Pepe and Milton Vieira, another split decision fight, had considerably more action than the previous two fights. I was just so burned out I couldn't really take it in at that point. Once your UFC party degenerates into buddies talking about random shit, it's hard to get your focus back on the fights no matter how good they are, until you get to some named fighters. And Milton Vieira and Pepe Castro, these are guys that are known to obsessives who paid attention to the Brazilian edition of Ultimate Fighter, but for anybody else, they're just two random dudes, one of whom had a bad dye job on his hair, tussling around. And back and forth fight, good fight from both guys, no complaints. Happy to see either of them in the UFC again. I just hope it's on a better card when I can appreciate it. Then we moved to the final four fights, which were all aired on FX in the US. And lightweight Khabib Nurmagomedov came out and sent a message to the UFC's lightweight division by destroying Thiago Tavares. And this was the sequel to the Alcantara Pedro Nobre fight from earlier, because Dangerous Dan Miragliotta was in the cage as the ref. And I guess, he felt bad about stopping the other fight ridiculously early and stopped this fight ridiculously late. Tavares got on bottom. Nurmagomedov dropped him with strikes and followed up with vicious elbows, at least 11 or 12 strikes on the ground that I counted after Tavares was visibly out and before Dan Miragliotta stopped the fight. Dana White tweeted that we won't be seeing Miragliotta in the octagon again, and I whether or not he's officially got the power to do that, I think effectively he has the power to do that, and I'm all for it. Here's to you, Dana. Make that happen. We don't need to see Dangerous Dan in the octagon anymore. I think that was just complete bullshit. Thiago Tavares is a bright young man with a big future in front of him, and it's no good to see him taking that kind of unnecessary brain trauma. And then up next we had heavyweights Gabriel Gonzaga and Ben Rothwell. It's one of those fights for some reason I get excited about. The idea of two heavyweights I'm familiar with. I've enjoyed both of them in fights in the past. But this was just a sloppy, slightly over 2-round fight. Gonzaga submitted Ben Rothwell with an arm and guillotine. The most interesting thing about it to me was how bad Ben Rothwell's sprawl was before that, because he belly flopped on a sprawl, and that's how he ended up getting Gonzaga getting his neck in a arm in guillotine. And for a veteran of his experience to tap to an arm in guillotine, just not impressive. Nothing about Rothwell was really impressive in this fight. The only impressive thing about Gonzaga to me was the way he looked at the screen in the arena to check his arm position, to see if he had the position to drop down to his guard and finish the choke. He felt he did. He dropped to his back, tightened up on the choke, and Rothwell tapped. So good performance from Gonzaga, weak performance from Rothwell. I don't think either of these guys is really what I would call a factor in the heavyweight division, though. Maybe Gonzaga could fight Pat Barry. And as far as Nurmagomedov, I think maybe one more fight against kind of lower tier lightweights, and then I'd like to see him move up against Pat Healy or Jim Miller. A lot of people are calling for him to face Pat Healy. That's a pretty big ask for a young kid, but we'll see. We'll see. That brings us to the co-main event, and it's the kind of fight, CB Dollaway and Daniel Serafin, and you're going, this is the co-main event? What kind of event is this? And it was not a very good one, I have to say. But Dollaway and Serafin, they put on a good fight, 3-round fight, kind of sloppy, but both guys had their moments. Dollaway dominated positionally, but landed some good strikes all the way through. Both guys' faces were busted up by the end of it. Serafin tired out pretty early. I think if he'd had better conditioning, he could have stayed in the fight and maybe won it. He had some high water moments in the second round, but wasn't able to do it, and Dollaway took the decision. That brings us to the headliner, Vitor Belfort versus Michael Bisping. Bisping won the shit-talking awards beforehand. I mean, he put on a great performance at the pre-fight press conference, at the weigh-ins, at the stare-downs, saying, Vitor, there's no Jesus. I mean, that had people buzzing and laughing and howling and outraged and howling for his blood and the whole bit, everything you want to do in pre-fight promotion. But when they got in the cage, it was reminiscent of Mayhem Miller's performance against Michael Bisping, of all things. It was, very clear early on that Bisping had nothing to offer Vitor Belfort. From the very first time they exchanged punches, you could see that Bisping came away going, damn, this guy can hit hard. And Belfort came away going, damn, this guy cannot throw a punch to save his life. And once Belfort knew he had nothing to be afraid of, he really started mixing it up, started throwing a lot of kicks to the body that beautifully set up the fatal head kick. In the second round, you could see Bisping moving his arms down to block what he thought was going to be another kick to the body, and that meant his arms were low and the kick was high, and Vitor Belfort knocked him the F out. Michael Bisping is done, at least for the moment, as a UFC middleweight title prospect, and Vitor Belfort might be back in the title picture. I think he's 1 or 2 wins away from people saying, hey, this guy might deserve another shot. But he's a little older, and, he's Vitor Belfort. He's always been erratic. But I have to say I was really impressed by his performance. There was a lot of technical improvements seen. Everybody was saying, if Belfort doesn't win with his early blitz, Bisping's going to outpoint him, and Belfort was a little slow to get started in the first round, but he did pour it on right at the very end of the round. Bisping barely hung on to survive the round, and I thought at that point, well, Belfort didn't seize his moment, but in the second round they came out again, and it was very clear that Belfort just outclassed Bisping. They just strike so much harder and so much quicker with his hands and feet that Bisping really had no weapons to apply. He didn't even try for a takedown. He at one point tried to establish a tie clinch and throw some knees to the face, but that was pure desperation while he was taking a beating. And then the final head kick was so definitive that he had no chance, and the fight was over. Bisping showed good sportsmanship afterward. Belfort went right back to thanking Jesus. So all's right with the world. Michael Bisping's been restored to his place in it. Anyway, that's it for my bathrobe review. We'll be back next week. I'll be talking about UFC on Fox number 6. I'll be back earlier in the week with Eugene Robinson and Dallas Winston to talk about those fights coming up, react to this event, and talk about general things. And I'm hoping to get Luke Thomas back. So if you want to see me and Luke Thomas do another tete-a-tete, why don't you send a tweet to @SBNLukeThomas and tell him to get back on the camera with Kid Nate and do another tet. Anyway, subscribe to MMA Nation if you like seeing these things. I got 5 of you watching right now. Pretty heady stuff for a kid like me, but we'll be back. You can watch it on YouTube later. I'll be posting it on Bloody Elbow. Hope you had a good weekend. We'll see you next time. Hasta.